Hello, I'm Robin Diaper. I'm Curator of Maritime and Social History, and I'm here at Street Life Museum in Hull. And we've got some of our social history collections here, which you might find in any social history museum. But today we're going to look at these with Museumand. That's Lynda and Catherine from the National Caribbean Heritage Museum. And we're going to sort of go through them, and they're going to offer their expertise and historical insight into how we might look at these collections differently. Hello, thank you for joining us.
Hi.
Hello. So I'm just going to go through these objects, if that's all right, and then we'll take it from there. So I think there's going to be some quite interesting sort of backstories to these, if that's all right.
That's great.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning. And would you like to tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Yeah, definitely. Well, my name's Lynda, and I am the creative director of Museumand, and this is Catherine.
Hello, good morning. My name is Catherine Ross, and I am the founder director of Museumand. I founded the museum 6 years ago, and it's grown from strength to strength. So I'm really glad that we are able to work with you today to talk through your social history items.
And just to let you know, what I always tell people, just in case we have an argument or something, Catherine's my boss and my mum. So pray for me.
I'm in charge.
Yeah, it's important for me to know that.
Right, your first time. Well, before we begin, I'd just like to make this general statement. You're talking about the items in your museum that are of importance in terms of social history. But what I'm very delighted about is a lot of these items are found in our museum in terms of social history, just confirming that Black history is British history, white British history, that we have the same things, but we will find out we use some of them differently, and the reason why we have them are different reasons. But it shows the close connection between the Caribbean culture and white British culture.
That's why it's really important that we, Museumand, the National Caribbean Heritage Museum, are working with museums like yours, so we can make sure that everybody sees that our cultures and our histories are intertwined.
That's great, yeah. No, I think that's very true, isn't it? I mean, these are ubiquitous sort of social history items, but that's all part of the human experience, isn't it? And that's what we're sort of going to explore today. So our first object here, which is quite universal, is got a nice suitcase here.
Right.
Probably sort of 1950s period, perhaps.
Yeah, it's good to see that, and it looks very similar to ones that we have in our collection, but it's significant. I think it's particularly poignant for a Caribbean in the 50s, because that would be at the time when a lot of Caribbeans were now moving into the UK in order to help to rebuild the country after the war. So that suitcase is not just a suitcase for Caribbeans. It's not just a suitcase in terms of our history. It symbolizes the dreams and hopes and ambitions and aspirations that people were carrying, that they were bringing from one culture to the next. We were coming here to help develop the country, but help to develop ourselves, and also to send back to help our families that were left behind.
So that generation that actually came was what we call today the Windrush generation. And it's not that everybody was on the Windrush, but it all came, the Windrush generation was so called because the Windrush ship was the first ship that brought those Caribbeans from Jamaica, stopping at other islands as well, but it came from Jamaica to the UK. And from that, after that, subsequent different ships actually came over from different islands with different sets of Caribbean people. But today we call them all the Windrush generation.
And the Windrush generation is a period from 48 through to 1971, when attitudes changed towards Caribbeans significantly after that.
The most important thing out of all those things that we haven't mentioned yet, though, is that we don't call it a suitcase. We call them a few different things. We call them grips, mostly.
Yeah.
We call them police, because that was actually the name of a brand name, but then people call them everything. They're like the Hoover, you know. And what's there's other names as well. But they're the two main names that we call them. So if you've got Caribbean saying that they brought their grip, they brought the suitcase.
Well, and of course, with Hull being a port and a lot of migrants and transmigrations passing through, suitcases were sort of quite a common link. And it's such a powerful object for empathy, isn't it? Everyone can sort of imagine or the challenge of trying to pack up your life in one suitcase or grip, whichever.
Yeah.
So the next thing we've got is lots of people recognise this, and lots of social history curators will as well, because these are so robust. They survive in people's life for centuries, certainly decades. This is a Singer sewing machine we've got here.
Well, there's a story and a half in a Singer machine. For a start, Singers were also popular in the Caribbean, and there was a Singer company, in brackets, Singer Jamaica, for instance. So they were selling a lot there, and I hear stories about them being touted around the Caribbean in carts, trying to sell them to people in the villages as being the latest bit of technology that's going to change their lives. And in fact, it did, because most people aspirational then learned how to use it and became seamstresses, and generated a lot more interest in different kinds of needlework. So a lot of young women aspired to be a seamstress, make clothes for their own vanity, but also to make clothes as a way of income generating, as a way of moving away from the fields and whatever, to sort of a more white collar type job or profession. And also a lot of men took that up as well, and tailoring is very big in the Caribbean. One of the things you will notice when Caribbeans arrived on the Windrush, all of those pictures that are shown, or the puffin newsreels that are shown, you will see Caribbeans looking what we describe as being very sharp. They have the latest fashions on. It was a way of advertising, look what I'm wearing, like it, I can make this for you. Or I'm coming here because, I'm a woman about town, I'm a man about town, I'm into style and fashion. So that's one thing. That's why it's key, because it was a new way of working back there, and it was a skill people could bring here because they were competent and accomplished in doing that. But also they were hoping to make a name for themselves with introducing these fashions and their styles into England.
One thing that we can do as Caribbeans is we can dress. We pop style.
That's a Caribbean phrase.
Kids do now. But the phrase is an old phrase. And before, obviously, we had Singer sewing machines. We did everything by hand, and we're very good at that. Even today, we do that. My mum's passed that down to my sister and I, and now I'm teaching my niece, who's 10. We can hand sew, we can do things by eye. So when people talk about the couturiers and that sort of thing, it's really funny to us because that's just how we work. Or when people talk about draping, again, because of my fashion background, talk about draping, I was thinking, draping? I've never heard of that form, so I studied. That's just how you make things, isn't it? We don't use patterns. We do use patterns now, but in the old days, we'd just see something and we could just copy it wholesale. Yeah. A bit like our cooking, we can taste something, we can just copy it wholesale. So it's wonderful. We're naturally good at things like that, and dressing is very important. But dressing style, the way people perceive you when you walk down the street, you act a certain way, you dress a certain way, you are that way, and all of that symbolises. And when you see something like a Singer sewing machine, it's all very symbolic, and all of that is encompassed.
On the actual ship's register for the actual Windrush, you will find a fair number of people that are listed there as either seamstresses or tailors. They were in the first lot. They realised the value of coming to Britain and making a new life.
Oh, that's interesting. And there's quite a big thing, isn't there, in terms of fashion and clothing, about self-respect as well, isn't it? And how you project yourself on the world. And of course, I think people forget now just how expensive clothes were in the past. And these are obviously used by people on quite low incomes in England as well. So next object we've got is this mysterious looking blue bottle here. I'm not going to move it because it's a little bit fragile with the label and so on. But this is from our chemist shop at Street Life. But on the label it says Bay Rum I wonder if you could tell me a bit about that.
It has its history in the Caribbean when sailors apparently been on ship a long time and not feeling the need to wash, but when they did, were or mixing with people who were not on the ship with them, you know, and they came off ship, rubbed themselves with bay leaves, and that got rid of the smell or body odor. So that's where it started, just getting a handful of bay leaves, you know, that are everywhere in the Caribbean and rubbing themselves so they smelled a lot better. So that was its origins, allegedly. But then it was turned into something, you know, made more easily available and a bit more easy to use. And it became a sort of body deodorant then. So it was produced and put in bottles so people can use it more easily. And again, it looked like you're going a bit more at market than grabbing a few leaves, if you get what I mean. So as people were progressing, that's what happened to that. But although it started out as being good for smells, it's also good after being days in the field or in the hot sun. It's a sort of thing that you rub on your forehead and it just eases anything to do with sunstroke or whatever. So it became more medicinal. So moved from, you know, the personal hygiene to something as a reviver for people generally that spend too long in the sun. Sorry, the other medicinal is not just sunstroke, but when they have colds, because we're subject to colds and fevers. The temperature is very hot 1 minute and they're very cool another as night falls. So yeah, it's a way of using medicinally.
Basically, when we were doing one of our exhibitions, which we have a TV show for Caribbean Conversations, Catherine lost her voice. Well, before she lost her voice, she got really ill. And one of the things we were talking about was Bayram. And this old lady went into her bag, got this tiny little bottle. So that could do the whole of the Caribbean. So it got this tiny little, put it on her hands and just came over to Catherine, just goes in there and
started to rub my chest. It's not just something in your medicine cupboard.
You carry around.
You carry around a little bottle with you as well, because you never know when you're going to feel the effects of the heat, or like me, lose my voice, and so a quick rub with that will get me back on my feet.
It's like our equivalent of carrying around ibuprofen or something. You know, nowadays you carry that in your bag if you get a headache or something. This you just carry on Bayram, just rub it on random people.
I forgot that story.
Quite a nice natural remedy. I'll just put that one aside for later on then. So. And then next item along, we've got this enamel mug, which would be very recognisable by lots of hull trawlermen and sailors. It's quite indestructible mug they would have had on board their ships. But I know enamel ware is on sort of your list of items with a particular history too.
Yeah, an interesting one, because it was like second wave of household utensil. Once enamel became fashionable, it was used to produce a whole range of everything: plates, dishes, pins, and all sorts of things. So once we discovered it, use it in lots of different ways. However, for Caribbeans that was still in the Caribbean at the time, it was quite again another upmarket approach to living, because up till then most people were using calabashes, that's gourds that cut from the tree, different sizes to match your different needs. So the small gourds for cups, and another one uses your bowl or plate, and then the larger ones for serving dishes and so on. So this was like, oh, look at me, I'm more modern. I've got an enamel mug, do you know what I mean? As opposed to having some natural gourd and so on. So it was a sign of progress for our people. But then after that, other utensils were created, because one of the things that Caribbeans are good at turning what we call nowadays recycling. So we were able to recycle a lot of other things since. So I would call that the second wave, the enamel cup of household utensils. And when people came to England, that was like, having arrived here, we could get china teacups that were big in England at that time, pretty, lots of different patterns, and lovely sound when you clink it. You can tell it was a china cup. So again, a lot of the Windrush arrival bought these items and sent them back home for family and friends to show, yeah, you're now in the wave that we've got here. You've arrived, as it were. And I usually tell the story that in England at that time, there were lots of open markets, and people would be selling china and kitchen utensils, you know, on open stores. And you could buy one cup or, you know, 2 or 3 cups, whatever. You didn't have to buy a whole tea set or a whole dinner set. You could just buy a couple of items. And a lot of people did that. So you bought odd cups to send home, because it doesn't matter. The people back home wouldn't care if it was just 1 or 2 and it wasn't part of a full set. At least they had a china cup on their in their home that they can show to people and say, my family is in England and look what they have sent me. And then you could be the envy of your neighbourhood.
And just out of interest then, I suppose it's different now, but how do people generally drink their tea in the Caribbean? Because I was thinking of milk in the hot climate. Do people have lemon like in France?
Everybody does it slightly differently. There isn't one way of doing it. Some people swear by not having milk and just having lemon. Some people do lemon and honey if they're drinking more English style teas. But then we also have our style tea, what we call bush tea. And that's literally because you go out to the bush, and obviously different bushes have different types of tea leaves on there, and you pull them off, you boil them up, and you drink them. You don't just drink them for having a nice beverage. You also drink a lot of our tea for medicinal purposes as well. So some of them don't taste the nicest, but if you're ill, you hold your nose, suffer it, because literally 10 seconds, like can't be seconds, but literally very quickly after, whatever was wrong with you, you feel much better. And it's all the things that now the young trendies are picking up on, and the woke and websites like Goop and all those sorts of things. They're swearing by the things that I've grown up with, not really liked. I know they work, but now all the young trendies are using it because it does work.
Yeah, when the trend in England came for herbal teas, black people would look at each other. We've been doing that for centuries.
That's just tea, isn't it?
The only good thing is now you can buy the tea in tea bags. You don't have to go in your backyard and pick the leaves and whatever. So you can now have it in a tea bag. But of course, then they haven't got the same potency and so on. But it's much easier. But it's just seeing how something which we thought was uniquely ours, and perhaps an indication of our being poor, is now one of the latest and growing trends in Britain.
So the next item we've got here, which you can see in the foreground, is this score sheet of an old tune called Distant Drums by somebody called Jim Reeves. So do you like to tell me more about that?
It was certainly a hero to those that the Caribbeans that were in England up to the 70s. He sang a range of different songs, religious songs. He sang country songs, and he sang love songs. So whatever mood Caribbeans were in, there's a Jim Reeves for it. He's part of our life and social experience and so on. But I suppose it's mainly his religious songs that people would know. Sundays, wherever you were in the country, or in Great Britain as a whole, wherever you were, and there was a Caribbean around, you would hear Jim Reeves playing at some time, either early in the morning before you go to church, or when you come back at lunchtime and the meals being prepared or the table set. And then just to wind down on a Sunday, you would hear his religious songs playing. So you'd know there's a Caribbean somewhere nearby. And then his love songs, which I put distant. Well, I put distant drums in that category because it's also a bit nostalgic. Oh, you're missing home, you're missing your loved one, and so on. So that was played a lot.
Did he have connections to the Caribbean, or was he just on the radio and part of the culture a lot?
I think it's because he came from America and American songs were just coming into England. But I think the Caribbean has a greater affinity in terms of culture and so on with America. They were a bit ahead. A bit like we look to America now as well. Do you know what I mean?
I think also some of that is because this is what a lot of the Windrush generation tell me when I'm working with them and doing oral histories and what have you, is that, you know, we love music. We're an island people of great music, and all the way back to Africa. And when we came to England, there wasn't much good music unless it was American music. And one old lady always says to me, I mean, I don't care how much that puppy was in the window.
Oh, yes.
Why would I care about that? You know, the music, you know, we want a bit of a beat. You guys don't know what a beat is. Nowadays, maybe we do, because we've integrated, but there wasn't a beat in England. So all you had was the religious music, and that you didn't mind so much if it wasn't what you expected of religious music, but it's praising the Lord, so you can compromise. So with Jim Reeves, because he praised the Lord, that was okay. But it wasn't, if you could mix Jim Reeves with a bit of a beat, a Caribbean beat, it would be even better. But that's why I think it was okay, because it was your Sunday listen.
Yeah, we have to remember we came post-war, and Britain was still singing stuff about the war. So, you know, as it passed by a lot of Caribbeans, we weren't interested in songs around that theme. Songs around that theme were, again, emotive, but not what we were accustomed to in terms of a jazzy beat. So finding people like Jim Reeves just hit the spot for a lot of us. And yes, people did say that song, which I do remember singing, how much is that doggy in the window? Woof, woof. And they were like, what are you singing about?
This is a nursery rhyme? Why an adult be singing that?
Or it was run, rabbit, run. So yeah, Jim Reeves met everybody's needs.
Did people pick up American radio stations in the Caribbean then as well? The reason I asked is because I know Hull Trawlerman, people always asked them if they listened to sea shanties, but they didn't, because they were sailing. They'd sail almost as far as, you know, coast of Canada, and they'd pick up the American radio stations, and they always played country and western. So picking up those stations.
Actually, now you've said that, that makes sense, going back with the Jim Reeves and thing, country music. So you've taught me something there.
Yeah, and I seem to remember, like in the early days, people like Bob Marley were very influenced by American music as well, weren't they? People like James Brown and so on. So next two items I've got here are really nice, quite small items, and they're sort of social history in a different way because they're off the coast of West Africa, so they're West African social history. And there's a couple, I don't know if you can see those, a couple of small bangles with a little gap that doesn't close the circle, and one's obviously for a child and one's for a woman with quite a slim wrist, I think. And I wonder if that sort of rang any bells for you at all.
They're called, back in Africa, they're called manillas. And we also call them slave bangles, or we just call them traditional Caribbean bangles as well nowadays. And we still wear them today. It's very important, and it shows your history, on your arm. These ones here, these thinner ones, are more like the original ones. So it's similar to what you showed. And every time I go back to the Caribbean, there's a new version of it. Like a new younger designers have come up with different sorts of versions. So every time I go back, I buy a different one. And I've had them since I was a child. So it's quite funny that now I've got a big man wrist. I've got big man sizes, but you see all my progression of sizes. And my niece and nephew keep trying to get them off me. And I'm like, no. When I've gone, you can have them. Until then, you can't. So then I got these ones, which are like flatter version. One here, flatter version, and they've been studded. And then last time I went to the Caribbean, about 3 years ago, I only got one of these, otherwise I thought my arm would be too full. And someone's now put actual hibiscus flowers, which are very synonymous with the Caribbean, on the end. So every time I go, I try and get a different one. I only get silver because I haven't got any money, but you can get beautiful gold ones, but they're too expensive. But there are slave bangles, because it's been said that that the enslaved, well, before enslavement, way before then, that's where you showed your wealth. This was your money. So it was like a currency. Right?
That's right, yeah. It started out as being the currency thing. And then also some of the engravings on them also tell the family's, that individual's history or their family's history. So it's an important social history tool as well.
In those days, you could look at it and you could tell what village that person came from, even if they were married or not, all that sort of thing.
How many children?
Mine's just for fashion. I don't have a million kids. I've got little bumps all the way around. I don't have one child, but the things like that you can be able to read from your bangles.
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
And you tend to pass them down in the family. So if somebody passes, you have to, nowadays you have to say who you want to have them, otherwise hell breaks loose. Everybody wants them, especially the gold ones. So it's really important when you do get something from somebody that it tells everything about your family. It's so precious and dear.
And then another item we've got from our collections from the west coast of Africa, we think, we don't know for sure, we need to do a bit more research, is this comb. It's obviously a bit different from sort of a Western European style comb. I wonder if you could tell me a bit about
that. Well, I don't recognise where it could come from because I'm not that close to it. But it is a style that's been around a long time in Black culture, days from Egyptians and so on. So it's been around a long time. Our beautiful natural hair responds to a comb like that. You can just tease it out and make it more beautiful.
More manageable as well.
Yeah.
And they're really fine-tooth combs. And that's shaped similarly to what we call today an Afro comb or an Afro pick. But that was a precursor of all combs. But then they just became slightly different shapes. But then that one, because of the way it was, you can actually get through the texture of our hair as well. So nowadays, actually, we're going back to more of those full combs like that. So you can put it through and it goes through your roots as well, because our roots and our natural hair tends to be quite tightly curled and thick, very thick, dense hair. So that style comb is perfect for that. And yes, so even though it's the precursor to all combs, then the Afro comb is shaped similarly to that, but usually going in at the sides to make it easier to hold and to grip.
Yeah.
But during the Black Power days, when we were wearing afros to show that black is beautiful, we're here to stay, can't tell us that the way that we look, the way that we dress, the way that we act isn't good enough, and we started wearing our hair as full afros. Some of our guys and girls would have the actual afro in there to also enhance that fact of
leave the comb in their hair propped up as a statement. You mean
as a statement to show that we're here, we're happy with the way we look, even though we're often tried to tell, we're not often told that we're not good enough, we're not pretty enough, we're not enough, our identity doesn't matter. But that was our statement to say, we're black, we're beautiful, we're black and we're proud, and we're going to wear our comb, we're going to wear our afros with pride.
Yeah, so it moved from being an essential part of our beauty routine, combing our hair, to power statements, identity statements. We weren't afraid anymore to assert who we are and what our roots were.
So we're showing all of that through our hair.
Yeah, and the designs of combs, like the design of the bracelets, made statements as well. So the end, as Lynda said, that's quite square and functional. You'd hold it like that. But some are smaller and have a fist, which the fist symbol is now synonymous with Black Power and freedom and so on. So different, the ends of the combs were etched and created in different shapes to make the statement. So you didn't have to verbally say anything. So I'm very pleased that you've got one now, and I'm very pleased to see when we first came to England they were not available, but then we got them from America when America started with the Black Power, so that was great. And what is even better for me is now that a lot of white people, I say white people because they may not be English, have used Afro combs because of different hairstyles and because of their different roots of origin. You need a comb like that. So you see lots of people using it, but it's got nothing to do with why we use them. It was just it's an easier tool to manage their hair. And because again, having been in England for so long, and there are so many people in the brown category, people who are brown also have, they may look white, but their hair texture is more Caribbean. So they need a comb like that. So just about everybody's using them nowadays, but for different reasons and their style differently.
It's amazing how much stories you can get out of just one sort of simple item in the collections, isn't it? Yeah, you might not believe it today, but I used to have a very big head of curly hair as well. That looked a bit more like a cauliflower, though. Really, it didn't really work for me.
Oh, well done.
And then we've got something that almost everybody will recognise, I think, Dominos.
We love Dominos, and yes, everyone play. Well, most places play Dominos. And when we came here, around the world, but Caribbean, we all play Dominos. And when we came here, especially during the Windrush era, we were so happy to see Dominos in the pubs when we were allowed into the pub. If we were allowed into the pub in social spaces, and that you guys play by just putting the dominoes down and matching the numbers, and that's it. When we play. We smash the dominoes down. We make noise. We have colourful things. Of the Caribbeans, we are quite a noisy people. We are colourful people. We're expressive people. We're not noisy. We're expressive in all ways. And that's why we're fun and fun-loving. We're not noisy. We're just fun. And that's how we play dominoes as well. And when the guys play, women play as well, but it's usually, if you say men play, and they all have nicknames for each other, and they all have a tot of rum. If they drink, not everybody drinks, but back in the day, it would have been more people would drink than not. And it could be an all-day affair, an all-night affair, especially playing dominoes. And you shoot the breeze and put the world to rights. And it was our social way of coming together, being ourselves, not having any judgment, as you know, at that time it was terrible, life in England, majority of the time. And so it was our time to be together in our safe space with our safe game and be ourselves and not have to, do the yes sirring and all of that. We could just be ourselves. So that's why it was even more colourful, because we could really feel like we're back home in the Caribbean. When we say back home, we mean back home in the Caribbean, and being ourselves in our safe spaces, although that's a modern term. So Dominoes encapsulates all of that. I mean, nowadays there's less of us playing, but the good thing is that schools have picked up on it and they're using it as a learning tool as well for everybody, not just the Caribbean kids. But it's usually like your grandparents that still play dominoes, and I was taught by my grandfather to play dominoes, not the best player, but it's that sort of thing where you spend time with your granddad and you have your chats and catch up, and you've been playing dominoes and you're learning something cultural as well.
Yeah, some parents did teach their children, but it was generally children would sit in villages watching the adults play and learn from watching, a little bit learning by Nelly, seeing how it's, which is an English expression, meaning watching other people do it and then copying. So that's where a lot of people learn. So I think, as you say, one small item tells so many stories. That's another example of that. So it's what I'm saying about your culture having things, but to us it means something significantly different. So it was like you, an opportunity for men to get together and play and relax and whatever. But because where we played it, children were able to watch and learn, because we don't just match, which is the English way, we read. So seeing other people do it, you'll know what that means and so on. So you're learning there. It took a while before women were encouraged to play in public spaces. But I think that's happened under equality, and also because there are fewer men around. So if you want to have a good league match, then you've got to have some women playing. And we've had 2 major leagues since we've been in Britain. I think the first one was called the British League, Domino League, and that was about early 50s. And then a new one started in the mid 90s. So we try to keep it going, and that means allows Caribbeans to travel around the country to play with other teams and so on. And it's been known that Caribbean teams have come up to play, whoever's the winning team here in England, or just generally just to come up and play some island games as well. So it's been a brilliant way. But I was so surprised about 10 years ago when I heard that British schools were using it to teach children maths. So again, it's a little bit of learning to read the dominoes, not just match the dominoes. So take credit. I'll put my fist up. Yeah, we did that. We perfected school learning.
And like Catherine was saying, so British Caribbean teams come to Britain to play, or Caribbean teams from around the world. Canadian teams are quite big, aren't they? They do travel. So it's something that we keep in. It's like a bonding session.
Keeping links with home.
And other places where Caribbeans are. And we've heard that they're trying to get dominoes to be an Olympic sport. So it's not going to be a pastime anymore. They're trying to get it recognised as a sport so they can go into the Olympics.
But there is an a world league, but they just want it to be put within the Olympic sphere.
So I remember playing dominoes with my grandparents, and something else that is sort of reminiscent of my grandparents is I always used to see one of these on the stove, which is a pressure cooker, which is still a bit of a mystery to me, I have to admit. So tell me about that.
I think that's the only item I personally have never had, because my mother had one, and she always used to say, stand back, when she let the steam out. So for me, it always seemed a dangerous piece of kitchen equipment. But it became essential to Caribbeans later on, about the 70s. But initially, they weren't in the Caribbean home. And the reason for this is we soak. It was used. It's used by Caribbeans to cook peas, which Caribbeans have a lot of dried peas for their rice and peas dishes. And so you would soak the peas traditionally and then boil them, but it would take, a fair few hours. So you boil them at least a day before, but you soak them at least a day before, then you'd cook them on a slow heat the day you need it. So it was it was a lot of time, labor intensive. So when the pressure cookers were made more widely available to people, Caribbeans then started to use it, because then you can do your peas the same time as you're cooking normally.
So it's not just our peas. Peas are very important for us. But all of our food, well, majority of our food, is all about low and slow cooking. Getting, whether it's even starting with the seasoning of things, or the soaking, seasoning. Or the soaking of your peas. Those, it's a process, and it's a labour-intensive process, and it's time-consuming process. So, people, good Caribbean cooking in the old days would start seasoning your meat, could be even a week before you even wanted to eat it. And it really would be. Nowadays, you do it a few days before, but a proper cook would take longer. So it's all of those things. When a pressure cooker came out, you don't have to spend all day with your food in your in your pot.
Pots, isn't it?
What do you call our
Dutch
pot?
pot.
Dutch pot. If you're Jamaican, other islands have different names with similar pots, but you wouldn't have to, just use your Dutch pot and be there all day simmering and when you cooking. You could do this; it would be much quicker. So that's when it became fashionable. So it's much quicker. I mean, most Caribbeans would have had it, and like Catherine was saying, and people were a bit scared of it. But then nowadays, modern Caribbean households, they use them now as well, but they use the new ones that you don't have to be scared of and stand back and all of that. Just so you can have our traditional meals, but it doesn't take you all day to cook it. Especially nowadays, most women aren't just at home all day and aren't homemakers. We're working, and men as well, obviously. But in those days, it was mostly about the women that would have to do that, and people have got things on. So it's either you get a takeaway if you want to have our food, or you'd use the time-saving ways of doing it, or you do the batch cooking. So if you're a modern Caribbean family, you would use things like that.
Yeah. So it showed progress. We realised, back to Linda's thing about how important the Caribbean backyard was. You could go out and pick your peas and then cook it straightforward, because fresh peas you cook straight away. But then coming here in England and not being able to get them like that, so having to have them dried and all of that process we've just gone through, the pressure cooker was a lifesaver. But nowadays, even more labour saving and time saving, you can get them by buying a can of peas already done.
I thought you were going to say Deliveroo and Uber Eats. Just dial it.
No, but if you wanted to cook it, you could buy a can of peas already.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's funny that it is good and it's quick. It does taste so different. When you have a proper cooked Caribbean meal, you can taste the difference. You really can taste the difference. We were saying that the other day. We had something, and even the smell's different. So it's nice to do that, but we have to move with the times. I haven't got all day to be standing up there. My dad's passed now 3 or 4 years ago. But even when I went to his house a few years ago, you'd wake up and I go to the loo about 4 o'clock. And I can start smelling, or him chopping, and 6 of you wake up and you can start smelling things because he started cooking early. I'm thinking, I'm not waking up at 4 o'clock to start cooking. I love my family, but not that much.
There is a limit. It must have an amazing depth of flavour then if it's that much.
Definitely. I mean, Daddy didn't use a pressure cooker. He was still doing the old way, but yeah, it does have. It's the layers of the flavour. Even when my grandma used to try to be, Grandma Burrell on the Burrell side, tried to be a bit English, and she'll say, we can have some baked beans. And you'd wake up and like, what's that? Not baked beans, I've seen that if I can. But she'd add this and add that and add the flavouring here and add that. It was a gourmet meal, but it was a can of beans. But when you're a child of 7, I didn't want the gourmet ones, I just wanted the ones out of the can. We make it this gourmet experience. It's amazing.
Right, that's great. So we go from the stomach to the soul, and we've got a Holy Bible here. So would you like to, obviously these quite universal experience, but always very different cultures. So
well, again, it's a shared history. It wasn't our original form of religion, but it was imposed on us. And there were two strands running alongside. One, we embraced it, and another one, we used it.
Have no choice.
Well, what I meant was we used phrases and concepts to fit what our experience was. So we go into heaven, and we would say to the slave masters who insisted that we do religion, and they says, well, you'll go to heaven. We said, yes, we would like to go to heaven. But to us, it meant we wanted freedom. And so when it was a language between the enslaved as to what was happening. So they weren't going to go to heaven. They were planning a runaway, or people were coming to hide at their home or whatever. So the language we framed in a sort of underground way. And when we were going to the river to be baptized, that was a mode of escape. we're going to go across the river. So I love that. I think our people were ingenious to come up with things like that. So that's that side. But the other side was people actually believed that, and for them it was a personal faith, and so much so that Caribbeans are known as being a people of strong faith. So coming up, and I said I'd come back to the suitcase. In that suitcase would have been the Dominos. People would have used the Dominos to play as they travelled up on their 3-week or however long their journey was by ship. And with that would be a Bible. And the Bible would have been a gift from generally somebody older, or if you were a member of a church, your church minister would have offered that. Yeah, so the Bible is a very important, has an important place in our lives. It really is something that we spend seven days a week and believe in 24 hours. So we use a lot of Bible phrases in our normal life. Yeah, speech is littered with it.
Even people that aren't particularly religious, of a certain age, they will use a phrase.
Oh yes, of a certain age. Windrush definitely very, very strong. It's now coming back in importance with the younger generation, but there was a lull, and I think that lull associated with not having a good time here in the UK, and things like the riots and whatever. Well, these people don't seem to want us. They don't seem to be grateful for what we do. So there was a little lull in church membership and church attendance, but I think it's picking up and becoming strong again.
I think also, whether you are religious or not, at the beginning of your life, you tend to touch more religion.
Yeah.
And then you may not go to church at all, or you may just go to church for weddings and funerals and christenings and that sort of thing. But then when you do pass, even if you're not religious, the religious people in your family take over, and you have a very religious service, whether you believe or not. And I think that's a really nice way, even if you're returning to God.
Yeah.
And that's going to happen. You usually want that to happen, whether you're religious or not. And that's one thing about us, because of our past, we were very religious to have the hope to get through what we had to get through. And having got through that, some people carry that on. Most British, English, white people, they go to church on Sunday, and that's it. But like Catherine said, we have prayer meeting in the week. We do charitable things constantly. It's not just, this is the thing to do at the moment. We do it all the time, whether it's, with homeless people, doing a bit of shopping for them, or if a family needs something, giving that to that family and supporting them.
But on those occasions, you would pray with the family.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't just go and
give them something,
give them food or whatever. You would pray.
Give them that continual support as well, the church as a whole.
So the Bible is not just for reading on a Sunday and that sort of thing. It's an integral part of our lives. That's why you would have found in those suitcases at least one Bible, because a person would have sent that with you as a gift. You can't get better than the word of the Lord, they would say. But you may bring your own Bible as well, because again, most families did have, or most individuals have their own Bible. It was an important.
And even nowadays, as when I was growing up, or even my sister's children, and they're like 5 and 10. When you're born, you'll get given a Bible, and that's your childhood Bible. I still got my childhood Bible, and then when you 16, you get another Bible, and then obviously when you get older, you can get as many as you want. But that's what's always been given to you from your family. So that says a lot about you as well. And then most people of the Windrush generation, I know, because I still work with them and family members and what have you, in the morning, they start their morning, they read their Bible.
Family worship or
even on your own, and at night, before they go to bed, they may read other books, they read their Bible. So you always hear an older Caribbean that they're in bed with their Bible. And that's just what we do. But then also, yes, if you are more of a religious family, you have family worship. So every morning and every evening, you sit together and you'll read, you'll pray. We used to do that when we to church more regularly. But those times, if I think about it now, are so precious, and having those conversations and learning and that sharing together, that sets you up for life.
Yes, I like that. So that would have come in that case. That would have been important. Other things that would have come in the case, as I said, were Dominos and things we played, and of course some day rum,
and some rum.
Yeah, carrying all your cultural items with you. Yeah.
And then last but perhaps not least, we've got a couple of quite magnificent conch shells here. I don't know if you can see those, which obviously for a lot of English people, they would have been extremely exotic items, and I think they'll perhaps different memories of them. I don't know. What would you like to tell me about those?
Right. They're important because the whole of the sea is important. We're islands and surrounded by the sea. And to catch one of these meant either you were going to eat well or you were going to be able to sell it well, you know, in the markets and earn money. But the shells were then kept as decorative items at home. So sometimes in the steps leading up to your house, you would have them on the edge of the step, you know, sort of bordering the step. So it looks very, very attractive and so on. And then we brought it here as a reminder of that, the reminder that the sea was important to us, that we're an island people, etc. And it just looks pretty. And
some people do decorate them as well, don't they?
Yeah.
They're beautiful as they are, but some people do decorate them now. And people also have them inside their homes and like the glass cabinet, that sort of thing.
Or at the fireplace on either side where you'd have kept the fire irons as an English person, but we would put the conch shells there.
So basically, if you go to a Caribbean home, again of a certain age, you'll see a conch shell somewhere. I suppose even younger people would have them, but they're for different reasons.
For different reasons. They've been to the Caribbean and they've bought something back as memorabilia, or people would have sent it to them. The gifts that come this way from the Caribbean to England. I know we send a lot of gifts back to them, but that's the sort of thing that somebody in their family may have sent to them.
And of course, the Caribbean are all islands, very much associated with the sea in some ways, like bullies as well. So there's always something about societies that are connected to the sea. It's so important to them, isn't it?
Yeah.
And
there's a fishing and stuff like that, and a number of our what do you call them, national dishes feature seafood. Yeah.
And of course, with a show like this, you've always got the sound of the sea with you as well, haven't you? When you
lots of sweet ways in which it can bring back memories. Very evocative. Yeah.
Right, well, that was the last of our items. So thank you so much for that Afro-Caribbean tour of our collections, really. It was real insight to see those different stories just behind sort of everyday items.
Yeah, so therefore, we have, I want to reiterate again, that these items show we have a shared history, but although it shows progression and modernization and a love of tradition as well in the conch shell and the Bible and so on, the importance we attach to them though differs. Yeah, some are just purely practical, others are practical because it allows us to continue our culture, or our culture. These made a significant change in the development of how we became even more British as opposed to just Caribbean.
That's right, and it all becomes, as you say, part of British history as it is now, doesn't it?
Definitely, it's our shared history.
But that suitcase, the biggest and best and favourite item, is still found in many Caribbean homes, and whether that's on the wardrobe or top of the wardrobe or under the bed. And a lot of the Windrush generation still have a lot of important papers in them, because we never meant to spend most people didn't mean to spend all their lives here. They came to help Britain. They thought within 5 years, 10 years perhaps, they'd have done that and be able to go back. So they kept their suitcase prepared for the return journey home. That's why people have still got them, as opposed to like getting the latest and binning it or whatever. It was, one day I will go home again, so I'm prepared and ready.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a
Thank
great
you.
chat.
Enjoyed it.
See you soon, guys. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.